horses are the descendants of the knight's charger, which was developed by careful breeding in the late Middle Ages to carry their riders into battle. But the future importance of the medieval chargers was to be as the founding fathers of these modern heavy horses. Disregarding all evidence which suggested the superiority of the light cavalryman over the heavily armored knight, Europeans continued to develop the knightly image in tournaments and set-piece contests. In these tournaments, an increasing weight of armor for both horse and rider stimulated the need for larger and stronger horses.
At the beginning of the 13th century, as armor became slightly heavier each year, more or less, King John imported 100 Flemish stallions into this country, and that was the beginning, really, of the great horse, or destrier.
The great horse, or destrier, was expensive to train and maintain. Because the knight would often have a sword in one hand and a shield in the other, the war horse had to learn to stop, move forward, and turn in the midst of battle, responding entirely to the rider's legs. The major disadvantage for the knight, as infantry became more disciplined and the firepower of archers increased, lay in the tactics used.
In 1296, Edward I, possibly almost for the last time, used the great horse with considerable success at the Battle of Falkirk, and he combined the charge, or the knight's charge, with the use of the longbow and shattered the Scottish schultron. Now, the Scottish schultron was, I think, probably invented by Wallace. It was one of the sort of forerunners of the square. It was a bristling hedgehog of about 1,500 men using the pike, the front rank kneeling, rear ranks behind, and it was very nearly impenetrable against the great horse, unsupported. And it was one of the earliest forms of defense against the great horse.
18 years later at Bannockburn, where Edward II was completely outmaneuvered by Robert the Bruce, the English horsemen became isolated and, lacking the room to maneuver, were overwhelmed by the Scottish spearmen. Here, the English were bogged down in the low-lying land on the approaches to Stirling Castle. The Scottish foot soldiers, in their tight formations of spearmen, gradually forced the English back on a narrow front, where they were unable to maneuver or bring into effective action their 4,000 knights. The Scottish light horse, on the other hand, had complete freedom to attack and disperse the unprotected English archers. The result of the tactics was to prevent Edward II from ever being able to make use of his superior numbers, so that the disciplined Scots infantry were able to destroy the flower of English chivalry without the English foot soldiers taking any effective part in the battle. As infantry became more organized and disciplined, it was their pikemen who were able to break up a heavy cavalry charge. Supported increasingly by the use of the crossbow and Welsh longbow, steadfast infantry were able to expose the shortcomings of the heavily armoured knights and the tactics which they continued to employ right up to the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. Gunpowder did not initially hasten the demise of the knight, but as cannons improved their accuracy, they increased the need to rethink the tactical use of cavalry. The Archbishop of Canterbury of the time is on record as saying that the cost of maintaining a great horse would sustain 5 men. Additionally, the psychological impact of having great numbers of professionally trained horsemen riding in support, hooves thudding and armor crashing, must have been of considerable importance to the infantrymen of the time. And so, because it appeared that they should have been effective, to the military mind of the 13th and 14th centuries, it appeared that they were effective. Believing absolutely in the idealism of the knightly image, Henry VIII commanded that owners of enclosed land of 1 mile in compass must keep mares capable of bearing foals of at least 13 hands high, and that no stallion of under 14 hands was to run with them. Teams of horses don't have to stop and browse like oxen, and can work up to 4 times faster. This made it inevitable that as more and heavier horses became available in Northern Europe, there was a gradual increase in the use of them in agriculture.
These heavy horses ploughing today really evolved from the horses that actually carried the knights into battle. The Suffolk horse is probably the oldest and purest heavy horse in Britain today, each stallion going back to the horse that was actually foaled in 1760. The Clydesdale, of course, from north of the border, another good draft horse. And the Shire, that was evolved in the fen country in the Black Lands, and it's evolved into the massive animal we see today, some actually standing over 19 hands high. Really not a farm horse as such, more a horse for the commercial heavy lorry from up north and on the cobble streets of London, of course, years ago. The Persian that we see is really a newcomer to the scene, having only been brought over here since the First World War. But although they carried knights into battle, what a magnificent sight they make ploughing the land today.
The Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the 14th century, resulted in a shortage of agricultural labourers. This, in turn, made the added speed of the horse a particular advantage when compared with the slow-moving ox. Initially, ploughmen resisted the introduction of horses, as the increased productivity which resulted demanded harder and more sustained effort, and a certain amount of redundancy. A byproduct of the replacement of oxen by horses was the increase in communal life in the country. Formerly, the ploughman would have to sleep with his team at their place of work. The added speed of the horse meant that they could return over considerable distances to a settlement, thus enabling village life to develop. The introduction of the three-crop system of farming and improvements in agricultural machinery in the centuries ahead meant that there continued to be an ever-increasing dependence on the horse as a source of power. This dependence was to become vital in the next great advance in civilization.
Turnips, mangolds and Swedes were at the very core of the agricultural revolution. These, together with clover and ryegrass, provided the essential fodder for the livestock and therefore led to the expansion and intensification of mixed farming in Britain and in Western Europe. This meant, of course, very much more work for the horse, not only in more thorough cultivations, but above all, in hauling the new implements, and in the 19th century, powering the horse-driven machinery, which was at the core of the second stage of the agricultural revolution.
While in the West, the horse was just beginning to make his next great contribution to our history, in the East, the last great explosion of nomadic warrior power was taking place, once again on the back of the horse. Like the Mongols, the Tatars were totally dependent for their lifestyle on the horse. Traveling over 1,800 miles in 18 weeks, Tamerlane led his cavalry to the surprise and defeat of his Mongol overlord in 1369. As a cavalry general, Tamerlane's genius, his understanding of the supreme military importance of mobility, was studied by later great European generals like Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, King John of Poland, and Napoleon. Where Genghis Khan had destroyed, Tamerlane obliterated. In Isfahan, a pyramid made up of 70,000 human skulls marked his progress as the Tatar Empire spread throughout Asia and into the Near East to threaten the Turkish Empire. But the Turkish cavalry proved to be the equal of the Tatars. Turning back towards the east, Tamerlane determined to complete the conquest of China. However, before achieving this objective, Tamerlane died, and the Tatar Empire collapsed. A Chinese general of that time stated that while an empire could be won on horseback, it could not be governed from horseback. A view supported by the comparatively short duration of both the Mongol and Tatar empires. While they existed, however, travelers were able to move safely along the Silk Road between China and the West, and it was along this route that Marco Polo set out in 1275. The reports of the wonders of the Chinese Empire, which Marco Polo brought back with him to Europe, stirred Europeans with a growing desire to find a sea route to the east. It was this desire which was to bring the horse back to the land of his origins, thus completing a circumnavigation of the world which had started some 40 million years earlier. In the Americas, where the horse had died out some 8,000 to 9,000 years before the birth of Tamerlane, there were only two quite separate areas in which a recognized and organized social system had emerged, and both in the 15th century were less than 300 years old. Early in the 13th century, the Inca tribe had set up their capital, Cusco, in the Cusco Valley of Peru. Between 1438 and 1493, under their 9th emperor Pachacuti and his son Tupac Inca, their empire had spread out to include the whole of Peru and parts of Ecuador, Bolivia, and Chile. The Incas were great builders of cities and roads, bridges and aqueducts. Unique in the Americas, they domesticated the llama and alpaca. For speedy communications, however, the Incas had to rely upon specially trained human couriers to cover the 10,000 miles of paved roads within the empire. To the north, the Aztecs founded their capital, Tenochtitlan, in the first quarter of the 14th century in what is now Mexico. Inheriting the cultures of the Maya and Toltec peoples, but lacking any domesticated animals, the Aztecs used canals for transporting people and goods. Architecture, art, science, and agriculture flourished in this empire, and they wrote in pictures recording their history. Of their capital city, the Spanish conquistadores were to say it was the most beautiful city in the world and the Venice of the New World. To appease the gods, the Aztecs offered up human sacrifices in numbers which rivaled even Tamerlane's achievements, over 80,000 captives being sacrificed in 1487 to celebrate the building of a new temple. Elsewhere in the Americas, the inhabitants in the main lived the primitive life of the hunter.
America had the horse in its early evolutionary stage, but those horses died out, so that the American Indians never had the benefit of this animal that was available to the Europeans and the Asians.
A few tribes, like the Hopi, the Zuni, and the Pueblo Indians of Arizona and New Mexico, had developed simple agrarian societies, but lacking the means to move swiftly over long distances, most tribes were constantly on the move seeking or hunting food. As a result, it is estimated that in the whole of what is now the United States and Canada, there were less than 300,000 people. In his Ascent of Man, Dr. Jacob Bronowski stated that civilization can never grow up on the move. But in the Americas, the lack of even limited mobility inhibited the development of those civilizations which already existed.
We lost out on the cross-fertilization of our tribes and the opportunity for communication among the tribes and for the bearing of burdens that would make those people who were not as physically able, make them capable of traveling great distances. I think the horse must have affected our culture tremendously, and that we might have developed much faster if we'd had the advantage of the horses.
Now all this was to change. The opening up of the land routes between East and West under the Mongol and Tatar empires fired European determination to find an alternative route to the riches of Cathay. And this route was perceived to be westward, across the sea. The result was to be the conquest and eventual opening up of the Americas on the back of this horse, the Andalusian.
The Spaniards took the horses to America because the war in Spain had come to an end. They had been fighting the Moors for 6 centuries. The Moors had been controlling Spain for 8 centuries. And with the fall of Granada in 1492, suddenly there were a lot of high-powered fighters with nothing to do. So, where did they go? Obviously, looking for wars.
On his initial voyages of discovery in 1492, Columbus sailed without any horses. But the following year, having returned to Spain, he set off once again for the Indies, carrying 20 lancers and their horses. Spanish cavalry usually chose to ride stallions, but on this occasion, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, fully appreciating the importance of these horses, proclaimed that 5 of them shall take 2 horses each, and the 2 horses which they take shall be men's. By 1500, the Spaniards had set up a stud farm in Haiti. so that when Cortes set out in 1519 to conquer the mainland, he was able to take with him 16 horses.
And it's incredible to realize with that small number of men, they defeated 300 times their numbers. The horse was really psychological warfare. Here you had, coming in at full gallop, these tough little horses, these tough little men, and they came thundering in, jangling with bells and their lances at the ready.
Just as the Scythian horsemen had terrified the Greeks nearly 2,000 years earlier, so now horsemen appeared to the Aztec Indians as supernatural beings, and the cavalry charge by the Spaniards at the Battle of Tabasco proved decisive. Describing the 2 years of marching and fighting before they were able to reach and conquer the Aztec capital, Cortes wrote, "After God, our only security was the horse."
They worshipped one horse, hardly surprising. Cortes had to leave one of them behind when he marched on Mexico City. They looked after that horse superbly. They garlanded it with flowers. They gave it everything that they would give to a sick child. And of course, it wasn't the diet the horse required. The horse starved to death. Frightened themselves of what they had done, killed the horse. They set up a statue and began worshipping it.
10 years after defeating the Aztecs, the Spaniards expanded their empire into South America. Landing in Peru in 1531, Pizarro moved inland with a small force of 106 infantry and 62 cavalry. By 1535, the conquest of Peru was completed. Again, it was the horse which was to prove decisive, terrifying the Inca warriors.
Just think how you would feel if this thing was thundering down on you with a man on it, all armored, jangling with bells. No wonder they called them centaurs, which is the mythological Greek name for man and beast welded together. You can see it to this day. Any show jumping, there's the centaur, there's the man and the beast, there's the power, and imagine that coming down at you.
Over millions of years, the horse had evolved into a fleet-footed creature of the plains, using its speed and its strength to get away from danger. Man had converted that speed and strength to ride into danger. A perfect example of this can be seen when man and horse perform together in the bull ring. Just as the Renaissance saw the reawakening of a European desire for knowledge, which led to the discovery of the New World, so now the opening up of the Americas further stimulated European culture. New discoveries in arts and science, philosophy and literature were complemented by a desire to recreate the classical forms of the Greek and Roman empires. And it was this desire that stimulated the renewal of interest in horsemanship as an art form. The works of sculptors and painters reflected a growing awareness of the grace and power of the horse, an awareness which was to develop into what is now known as the classical school of horsemanship. Like so many aspects of the horse, this form of riding originated with the nomadic horsemen of the Asian steppes. The Parthian invaders had brought the ancient mounted warrior games of Bagai and Bushkazi into Persia. The refining of these games into an early form of polo led to a particular form of dressage training in the riding academies. Adapted by the Byzantines, this forerunner of haute école developed into a series of circus movements. It was here that the equestrian art developed, which, when transported to Naples, was to form the basis for the revival of the European school of horsemanship in the Renaissance. The Neapolitan school of horsemanship, set up by Federico Grisoni in the mid-16th century, developed the high school movements which had evolved in the Byzantium Empire in the 10th century, based upon Xenophon's teachings of some 1200 years earlier. But whereas Xenophon's objectives had been to produce a horse capable of active military service, the Neapolitan school and its imitators paid only lip service to the military aspect of these movements, developing them as an end in themselves. To respond to these school movements, new types of horses were developed which were lighter and more supple. The constant search for the perfect school or dressage horse continues even today.
Crest is a 7-year-old Holsteiner gelding, and I think he is a typical Holsteiner. He is very obedient. He is catching on very fast. He has wonderful basic gaits, and he has, like I said, a marvelous disposition. He understands dressage, and he wants to serve. Well, I think there's a reason why the Holsteiner horses are so successful in international dressage. He is bred since 1328 to serve and to either be used in wartime or been used from one country into another, pulling goods around. The basic gaits and the ability, the construction the horse has, helps the Holsteiner.
The Spanish riding school of Vienna and the Cadre Noir at Saumur carry on the classical tradition of horsemanship today. Completed in 1735 for the Habsburg Emperor Charles VI, the Spanish riding school uses only Lipizzaner stallions, who are the descendants of Spanish and Neapolitan stock. To achieve many of these movements, especially the airs above the ground, requires particularly talented horses. Writing on the earliest forms of classical riding, some 2,500 years ago, Simon of Athens, a forerunner of Xenophon, stated, "A dancer forced to dance by whip and spur would be no more beautiful than a horse similarly trained." Here, the desire to achieve and the ability owes little to whip or spur. The deterioration of the roads since Roman times had made any form of wheeled travel a hazardous undertaking throughout the Middle Ages. Heavy, unwieldy carts, resting box-like directly onto the axles, were used for hauling heavy loads, while a lighter type of cart was equally uninviting to all but the most intrepid traveller. By the end of the 15th century, a general improvement in the roads was complemented by an improvement in passenger transport vehicles. By raising the body on these leather straps, a crude form of independent springing was created, which must, however, have caused those prone to seasickness to experience some doubt. By the use of a simple turntable and linchpin, the shafts, or pole, could now turn independently of the body, making the carriage far less unwieldy. There now followed a rapid increase in horse-drawn transport, so that by 1601 it was considered that there were so many people now travelling in coaches that the art of horsemanship would be lost. To guard against this happening, a bill was brought before Parliament designed to prevent excessive use of coaches. In the event, the bill was not passed, and the increase in the use of horse-drawn transport continued apace.
By the 1600s, there was quite a good stagecoach system running, and the stagecoaches then were hung on thoroughbrace springing. In other words, there were leather straps going from the back of the coach to the front, and the body hung on the straps, which must have saved some of the bounciness, but of course the roads were appalling. Potholes would have been very great. People travelled either inside, as in with this, but that would have been extremely uncomfortable. It would have been very hot in the summer.
Driving a four-in-hand really started in 1840 with the advent of penny post, when Mr. Palmer of Bath decided that a cheaper way of transporting the mails was by a coach and four. So he instituted the mail coach. They then discovered that the mail coach could be a lucrative form of transporting passengers. So we then had the road coach, or stage coach as more popularly known.
Initially, there were no seats on the roof, so that those who travelled there just had to cling on as best they could. Quite often, these passengers dropped off onto the bumpy roads, their departure passing unnoticed by the coachman as he continued on his way. This was the origin of the expression to drop off.
Often, gentlemen used to travel on the coach and reward the coachman handsomely if they were allowed to take the ribbons or pull the team along, as it was known. This became a popular pastime amongst the gentry, and they then started having their own coach and four. And you then got the private drag, which was a private gentleman's coach, which he used often for travelling to the races and taking his friends to parties and picnics. And driving a coach and four, you have three main aids. They're your hands, your whip, and your voice. The voice, as I'm talking now, you can see the horse's ears are moving backwards and forwards because they're used to listening to my words of command. Every coachman gets used to his horses and the horses to the coachman, so that when he calls their names, they will respond to his actions.
Initially, carriages were used mainly by women, men preferring to ride. It wasn't until the mid-18th century that carriages began to be used on a large scale. One of the reasons for this was that the roads suddenly got much better. Nevertheless, the improvements that we can see on these 19th century carriages, the large wheel at the rear, the improved suspension and the turning circle, all evolved in 16th century Europe, although most of these inventions and improvements had in fact been in use in China for centuries. Builders now began to build a large variety of lighter carriages with better springing, each of which was built to the particular specifications of the prospective customer.
Builders were very ingenious in their ideas, and they designed all sorts of marvelous things. And one was the way that they worked the steps, which unfolded in this very clever way so that people could mount, because there wouldn't have been a hope of climbing up into there without steps. Then we come to very much a general purpose vehicle known as an omnibus, sometimes called an opera bus or a station bus. You could use this vehicle to go to a race meeting. You could sit up on the top of the vehicle and watch the races. And if it started to rain, you could go inside for a picnic. Very much a useful vehicle. Also, it would have been used for collecting luggage from the station. There's lots of room on top for luggage and room inside for people. Extremely useful vehicle as an all-rounder.
An improvement in carriages and the ever-increasing desire for speed created a growing need for stronger and faster carriage horses. In Northern Europe, the availability of heavier horses provided the foundation stock, which when crossed with quality horses like the Andalusian and the Holsteiner, produced many new breeds like the Cleveland Bay, the Welsh Cob, the Norfolk trotter, and ultimately the hackney. Often, postboys or postilions were used to supplement or replace the driver of some carriages. Riding astride a carriage horse, mostly at the trot, required the rider to learn a new art.
Covering considerable distances at ever-increasing speeds, the trot was found to be the most economical pace. For the rider, however, it was very uncomfortable, until he learnt to use his stirrups and to rise or post to the trot. In this way, he was following the horse's natural movement. And by going in unison with him, their travels became a great deal more comfortable.
The opening up of the New World shifted the balance of trade away from the Mediterranean to the ports of northern Europe. As trade from these ports into the hinterland increased, so the demand for more and heavier land transport increased. And the heavier horses of northern Europe were able to respond to the constantly increasing demand for more and more draft animals. In Antwerp, for example, by the 16th century, more than 200 heavy loads were arriving a week from France and Germany, whilst local traffic amounted to over 10,000 cart and wagon loads. The concept of ranching, which was born on the Asian steppes, was developed on the central plains of Spain in the 15th and 16th centuries. It was this concept which the Spaniards took with them to the New World. In the New World, the Spaniards continued to look upon the horse as a creature apart, to be ridden or driven by gentlemen. For draft work, they preferred to use the ox, the mule, and the donkey. In direct contrast, in the emerging colonies of New England, the puritanical attitudes of many of the colonists reacted against the horseman as a superior being, so that the horse was seen as an integral part of the work ethic. Here, the horse was used initially as a draft animal, as a partner in the opening up of land, rather than as a rich man's toy. The return of the horse to the lands of his origin was now to affect the lives of the indigenous population. The Plains Indians had formerly been nomadic hunters, whose entire life centered upon the search for food. Now, as horses became available to them either by theft or barter, their entire lifestyle changed. Adapting rapidly to the horse, the North American Indians became superb horsemen, their skills matching those of the early Asian horse archers.
What it did was it permitted greater mobility for them. It permitted them to carry and acquire more in the way of material possessions. They could transport things more easily, and what they did was adapt the horse to their previous form of transportation, which was the travois, to use that in carrying their camp about, moving meat and so forth in their different possessions, so they could acquire more material wealth. The horse also came to be valued as a very important symbol of wealth and of status. Important individuals within a tribe owning many, many horses and having an obligation to share those horses with other less fortunate people. They would lend them to people for hunting or for warfare. Warfare was one of the very important things. The use of the horse permitted wider ranging of the groups, and it was also very important in hunting buffalo. The development of horse buffalo hunting was an interesting elaboration of something that already existed. Before the arrival of the horse, the plains nomads hunted the buffalo with a stalking, individual stalking, or group drives or surrounds where they would corner the animals in some particular area and hunt them there. After that, while they still used those techniques, when the horse became available, one of the things that they used extensively was the chase, and that was the picture that is a traditional Indian picture of the mounted hunter chasing the herds of buffalo, firing his bows and arrows into the herd, was actually a very effective way of hunting. They used the bow and arrow to hunt buffalo from horseback even after they acquired the gun, because it was much more effective. It was easier to reload. They could have more shots that way. They were more accurate with it, and it was an effective way for them to hunt buffalo. So wealth, status, mobility, warfare, hunting, all were things that were important and that the horse contributed to with this return to the plains of North America.
Kick 'em off. We're here on the South Canadian River, which is the border between the Chickasaw Nation and the Comanche Nation. The Comanches, as you know, were a part of the Great Plains Indians that followed the buffalo and had developed their nomad culture over a period of years and had modified that culture after they had used the horses themselves. I myself am a Chickasaw Indian. I, of course, represent a culture that's changed over many hundreds of years as we've been intermarrying with the Scots and various other European tribes over a period of years. Our culture has changed quite a lot with the coming of the white man. We have adapted ourselves to farming and cattle raising and to the utilization of the horse.
The horses obtained from the Spaniards rapidly increased into vast herds of tough and wiry wild ponies, providing the Indians with ideal mounts.
The other thing which the Spaniards brought with them to the Americas was their style of riding, which is called la wineta. It means, in fact, that they rode with a shortened leather and bent knees. They had obtained this form of riding from the Moorish invasion, which had taken place in that peninsula years before. The American Indian, when he took to the horse, finding wild horses or stealing them, he rode in exactly the same way. And this was the way in which the horsemen from the East had always ridden. They'd always ridden in the short style, leaning forward, with the horse outstretched. They were light cavalry in every sense of the word. Whereas on the opposite side, in Western Europe, we have the knight sitting with the straight leg. Quite different. The other way on. One's going backwards and one's going forwards. And it took, in fact, right up to the end of the 19th century before Europeans began to appreciate how important it was, if you were going to go across a country, to ride short with your weight going forward. It took all that time. And up till then, there had been this enormous division between the East sitting forward there, the light horsemen, and the heavy horsemen sitting there rather like that.
The Plains Indians, the Apaches, Navajos, Pawnees, and Comanches, were more than a match for the heavily armed Spanish horsemen. They could pour a hail of arrows from horseback far more swiftly than could the Spanish trooper reload his gun. Using these skills, the Indians were able to prevent the Spaniards from spreading westwards from Florida, a military factor which was of major importance to the future development of the United States. At this point, it's interesting to speculate what differences there might have been in our history if the horse hadn't died out in the Americas some 8,000 years ago. For the speed with which the North American Indian adapted to the horse suggests an ability and an intelligence at least the equal of our nomadic forefathers. Had they had the advantage of the horse, isn't it just possible that Europe, or even China, might have become the new world to the horsemen of the Americas?
We're just moments away this evening from the continuation of Masterpiece Theater's Sorrel and